There were always problems for everyone, but most of them always started with big money. CO Eugene was just an ordinary girl, but with an unusual fate. If it weren't for that cursed debt, she would have simply remained poor and ordinary. None of this would have ever happened to her, and she would have never crossed paths with such a dangerous beast. But if it was written in her fate, there was no way to escape it. All she could do was accept things as they were. When CO Eugene met him, she didn't fully understand the situation at first, but deep down, she knew she could handle it, even if sometimes she was scared. Whispers spread across the office. Mr. Jin Tayo was coming back home. As always, the sharp sound of the CEO's expensive heels echoed through the hall as she rushed to her office, greeting employees along the way. Whenever employees saw the CEO, they'd straighten up and greet her politely, making sure she noticed them at their desks. Eugene overheard the news about CEO's younger brother return, and it made her uneasy. Once the CEO's office door closed, everyone finally breathed easier. Some employees started asking who Jin Tayo was and why the CEO seemed so furious. Rumor had it that the CEO's younger brother was coming home, and that's why she was so angry. People said every family had that one difficult child. Some even whispered they might not be real siblings. Jin Soryang was the CEO of the company, but describing Jin Tayo with just the word complicated was an understatement. While Soryang was away, Executive Director Yoon wanted to meet her. The CEO wondered what he wanted. Maybe he had problems of his own. But she was already furious and distracted by her brother's return. And honestly, that return was a big problem. After all, he didn't exactly run away from home, lose his mind over women, or become some kind of social outcast. On the surface, he seemed normal, just as expected. But the truth was, Jin Tayo was a cruel bastard. Even though he hid behind many masks, his true nature always slipped through, and it wasn't a kind one. She remembered him as a quiet, normal child. Even when other kids teased him, he didn't seem to care. Tayo was 10 years old when he finally realized something was wrong. That's when everything began to change. A group of bullies approached him after school. He looked like a kid from a rich family. Easy prey. The boy panicked and bit the one who scared him the most, desperately trying to protect himself. That single bite was his first step toward the person he would become. Tayo bit so hard the skin tore, and that moment became his trigger, the beginning of serious psychological problems. Violence often starts this way. Maybe it's a survival instinct, but after that day, no one could stop him. One day, his father left Tayo outside the house as punishment, refusing to let him in until he admitted what he'd done wrong. It was one of the coldest days ever recorded. In the end, a battle of pride ended with Tayo collapsing after 5 hours and 17 minutes. If they had been even a little later, he might have lost his arms and legs to frostbite. An autumn day before graduating college, Tayo decided to enlist in the army. Leaving only a few words behind, he volunteered to become an officer. The whole family was shocked, but the reaction wasn't the right one. He joined the military without asking anyone's opinion. And honestly, his family tried to fix him afterward, but the truth is, he was just born a monster. 3 years later, Tayo returned to Korea after serving in a conflict zone most people never even got close to. Soryang was sure that Director Yoon couldn't just leave without a scandal, and asked who made sure he left quietly. Manager Kim replied that Secretary CO Eugene had brought him coffee, and shortly after that, he left. The CEO knew very well that secretaries had ways to handle things like this. Jin Soryang asked Secretary Eugene to come to her office. Meanwhile, she wondered if maybe it was worth keeping an eye on him. We're talking about 50 million. Nobody could quite believe it. It was a huge amount. Of course, it was just the first investment, not a salary. And what about 10 million won a month? Was that really too little? Her younger brother was supposed to finish his military service in 5 years, but only 3 years had passed, and now he was coming back. The CEO thought he might need some help. It seemed simple enough. Follow his schedule and escort him when needed. Most importantly, she'd need daily reports, 3 months max. The CEO planned to transfer her to the planning department afterward, a job Eugene had always dreamed of. But Eugene didn't understand. If this was so simple, why her? The CEO wanted her to keep an eye on her brother to make sure he didn't cause trouble. She believed Eugene could handle it perfectly. Eugene was stunned. What could she possibly do about the CEO's brother's problems? If something happened, she wasn't supposed to fix it. Just keep him away from the press. If he appeared on social media, the company stock would plummet, and the family would become the center of every scandal. Jin So-young didn't see it as too much to ask. Eugene really shouldn't have been that surprised. The conditions were unusual. What kind of man needed this much supervision? Eugene thought there had to be people way more qualified for a job like this. The CEO tried to explain delicately. She knew her brother wasn't the type to beat women or children, at least not yet. Maybe this was how they'd come to this day. That money. It felt like shame more than payment. She had to meet him, but Eugene didn't even know what he looked like. The CEO assured her she'd recognize him instantly. You'll know him when you see him. But the girl wasn't so sure she trusted such a vague statement. Things could go wrong. She tried to find the manager's number, but it wasn't working. The noise around her made it hard to focus. Because of her father's debt, she'd never had a full-time job, but she'd gained one useful skill that always helped her. Her biggest weapon was simple. She always told the truth. Even when people didn't like her for it, she believed it was the right thing to do. The moment of truth had finally come, and her instincts were screaming louder than ever. A cold wave of fear washed over her. She didn't have to wait long. The first thing that caught her eye was a guy. Handsome, but with a heavy, almost suffocating aura around him. He walked right up to her and called her by name. She instantly knew she shouldn't get involved with this man standing before her, but she forced a smile and replied that yes, he wasn't mistaken. It really was her. She greeted him politely, already knowing from the start that his name was Jin Tae-yo, and said it was nice to meet him. The secretary added that the car was waiting in the parking lot and offered to show him the way, but Tae-yo wasn't even listening. He brushed past her, clearly intending to leave. So Eugene tried to stop him, asking him to follow her. Inwardly, she was sure of one thing, but this man was strange. There was something dangerous about him. She asked if he'd chosen a place to stay, wondering where they should head. Tae-yo muttered something about going to the Central Hotel. He got the message. The rest of the ride was silent. She had no idea what to talk about with him. Tae-yo was the one to break the silence, asking if she'd been sent by his sister, the one who always had to keep everything under control. Eugene didn't even know what to say. She wasn't sure if she should answer at all. Jin So-young hadn't given her any clear instructions. All the CEO had said was that her younger brother was coming home from a long absence and felt uncomfortable, especially after serving in the military for so long. He probably assumed she was just some assistant assigned to take care of all his errands. But then he shot her a suspicious look and asked if she'd heard that he doesn't hit women or kids. It was so until 3 years ago. Encounters with women hiding guns under their skirts and children carrying bombs and fruit baskets had changed the way he saw the world. Nothing in this world came for free, but Eugene had been blinded by money. Tae-yo asked for her opinion, giving her that same unsettling look again. It felt terrifying, like her life was in his hands and he was deciding what to do with it. The look in his eyes was that of a wild predator, deciding whether to kill or not. And so the next 3 months would reveal everything, whether this beast could be tamed or whether she could survive beside him. So Eugene and Tae-yo had already arrived at the Central Hotel, the place he'd chosen to stay. As they entered the main lobby, they saw a man rushing forward to greet Jin Tae-yo with obvious joy. Even though it had been years since they'd last seen each other, the man recognized him instantly, but still asked to make sure. Was it really him, the young man who had served in the military? Kim Pyeok, the hotel's manager, came closer, asking when Tae-yo had returned and complaining that no one had told him. He would have given him a proper welcome. Tae-yo was just as surprised the manager Kim was still working at the hotel after all this time. Eugene was quietly amazed by their easy conversation. The manager smiled, admitting he'd already reached retirement age last year, but he was genuinely happy to still be working. "Even my mother wouldn't forgive me if I pretended not to recognize you because of old age," the manager joked lightly. Then he asked how long Tae-yo planned to stay this time, unaware that he had already been discharged from the military. When he found out, the manager was genuinely happy to hear that Tae-yo was finally returning to normal civilian life. Tae-yo asked manager Kim to prepare a room for him, saying he'd be staying there for a while. The manager promised to arrange everything and offered him his usual suite. While Eugene watched their conversation, trying to keep up with what was happening, something unexpectedly suddenly caught her attention again. A loud, arrogant man was making a huge scene at the front desk because the receptionist didn't know who he was and, in his opinion, wasn't treating him properly. He shouted that he'd invested a fortune into this hotel and demanded to know how she dared speak to him like that. He didn't want to hear any excuses, just yelled for the manager to be called immediately. The manager quickly appeared at the reception desk, clearly intent on diffusing the situation fast. Eugene wasn't even surprised. The world was full of liars. She silently wished the manager good luck. The manager politely asked the man how he could help. The man snapped back with loaded questions. Was he really the manager? Did he even know who he was talking to? Then barked an order to prepare the most expensive suite on the top floor. Kim Hyuk apologized politely, but explained that the suite was already booked. He offered him a luxury room on the first floor instead. The man thought the manager was either mocking him or too old to hear properly. He repeated again that he wanted the top floor suite. To Eugene, it all looked like a one-man circus, but deep down she felt like she'd seen this face somewhere before. The manager remained calm and patient. He said they'd arrange another excellent room for him and offer their best wine as an apology. The man got even angrier, grabbed the manager by the collar, and shouted that he wasn't some beggar who needed free wine. All he wanted was the top floor suite. Eugene could hardly listen to this nonsense any longer. But she didn't know how to stop it, and watching Tayo, she could tell he was about to snap. When she finally raised her voice, the man froze, but didn't even bother to look at her. His gaze was like that of a wild beast who'd smelled blood and wasn't about to back down from the hunt. But Eugene remembered the CEO's warning clearly. Her brother must never end up in the press. She realized the situation was critical, too dangerous, but she had to do her job, keep Tayo out of trouble. She needed to stop this. "Why are you ignoring me? Can't you even do your job?" The man snapped, still furious. Then he noticed someone challenging him from the sidelines and got even more irritated. His eyes landed on Tayo, who stood calm but stared at him with a deadly, serious look. The man couldn't back down now. If he did, he'd look like a fool. He had to get what he wanted from the manager. Eugene quietly took out her phone, hit record, and gave the man a polite smile. She asked sweetly if she could ask him a few questions. Tayo was surprised by her move, but didn't stop her. He was curious to see how this would play out. The man, already furious, snapped, "Who the hell are you?" Eugene didn't flinch and calmly asked, "Aren't you Director Lee Jong-jin from Hank Corporation?" The man confirmed her guess. Yes, he was the director, but had no idea what she wanted from him. The girl calmly warned him she was recording their conversation, then introduced herself as reporter Kim Ji-young from the Everyday News. What a lucky coincidence to meet him at this very hotel. Not too long ago, the second generation of conglomerates had been on trial after a drug scandal. The article about it had been weak, but who would have thought that today she'd get the chance to interview him in person? The man grew noticeably nervous and angry, demanding that she moved the phone away from him. But she told him to just ignore it. They could keep talking as if the phone wasn't even there. Just think about it. He was still on probation. Eugene continued her conversation with the unpredictable man. The woman standing nearby couldn't take it anymore. She'd had enough and walked away. The man decided to follow her, still yelling that everyone had made a huge mistake today. He'd spent a fortune on this hotel and hoped the devil would take them all. The manager and the receptionist finally let out a breath of relief. Eugene couldn't believe she'd actually managed to calm that crazy man down. At last, she could exhale. She'd been worried her plan was too simple and never expected it to work so fast. Tayo shot her a sharp look and told her never to interfere in situations like that without his permission. He hated when anyone got in his way. Eugene didn't care. She was going to do it anyway. It was her job, and she was paid well for it. He didn't care what kind of job she had, but warned her not to annoy him again. Otherwise, there would be serious consequences. She already guessed what those consequences could be, but even so, she couldn't allow herself to neglect her duties. The manager apologized for interrupting their conversation, but politely offered to escort them upstairs. Tayo didn't say a word. He just turned around and followed the manager. Eugene stood there, unsure what to do next. Her heart was pounding like crazy. She'd never been this exhausted in her life. It was already late at night when Eugene finally got home,
All she wanted was to rest. Without even changing, she collapsed face first onto her bed and didn't move an inch. She couldn't understand why this day felt so long. Tayo was already getting on her nerves to the point where she wanted to punch him, but one thought kept her calm. Her bed was so soft, and she'd missed it all day. But the same old problem was still there. Money. It was hard, but she had to push through for her own future. Just 3 months of babysitting the son of a third-generation Chael, and she'd earned 100 million won. It wasn't an easy job, but how could she turn down such an offer? 3 months wasn't that long. She just needed to prepare herself to ignore her client's unpredictable behavior. Sarah Eugene was born into a loving family, but they were never well off. She'd always dreamed of having enough money to buy anything she wanted. No matter how much she worked, her father's debt was massive, and everything she earned went toward paying it off. Her mother spent days and nights washing dishes at restaurants, but the pay was so small, they barely got by. Eugene had to juggle school and part-time jobs with no time to rest. They'd gone through a lot together, but the debt never got smaller. 3 months of this job would let her pay off 10% of her father's debt. She couldn't afford to lose this opportunity. Earning that much money, honestly, was impossible. When the CEO offered Eugene this job, she accepted without a second thought, even knowing how difficult it would be for her. She didn't even realize how fast she fell asleep. It felt like she just closed her eyes, and it was already time to go to work again. Greeting everyone with a warm good morning, Secretary Seo started her new workday. Jin So-rang asked how her brother Tayo behaved last night, but Eugene said nothing special happened. The CEO then asked if she planned to check Tayo's room to make sure everything was okay. But there were already rumors that last night he'd caused trouble in the hotel lobby. So-rang was probably talking about the argument that broke out when Eugene stepped in to help the manager get rid of an unruly guest. Eugene stood in front of the door, breathing heavily. She had never been this nervous before. Her entire paycheck depended on this guy. 3 months, she thought bitterly, still waiting for Tayo to open the door. What a great joke. And this was just her first day on the job. Tayo had made a scene in the hotel lobby last night. He probably went down to drink to adjust to the time difference. She assumed he'd gotten into a fight with a drunk guest. The man had started it, there were plenty of witnesses, and they'd managed to cover everything up. 12 weeks until the end of this assignment. But why wasn't he opening the door? She didn't get it. Anyway, Tayo's suite had plenty of rooms. The CEO's words kept echoing in her head. If she agreed to monitor him 24/7, she'd get an extra 10 million won each month. Eugene had always learned to adapt and obey her superiors. She knew exactly whose pocket her salary came from. She had to do whatever it took this time too. But she also needed to let off steam. She felt like she could scream for Tayo to stop pretending he wasn't inside. She didn't even notice the hotel staff member approaching her, who informed her that the guest from this room had gone to the gym and was now in the cafe on the second floor. That explained why no one answered. The staff member asked her to keep quiet so as not to disturb other guests. Eugene hurried to the cafe where Tayo was supposed to be after his workout. She spotted him sitting by the window sipping his coffee. Across from him sat manager Kim, who told Tayo he'd prepared everything he'd asked for, and to let him know if he needed anything else. When the manager saw Eugene, he said he had to go. On his way out, he greeted her, and she smiled back. Eugene walked up to Tayo's table and sat down across from him. She wished him a good morning and said she was glad to see him safe and sound. Did he really enjoy making people chase him around while he calmly sipped his coffee alone? Eugene finally asked him to at least inform her if he planned to go somewhere. She'd been waiting outside his room for ages. Tayo didn't think he owed her any explanations. If she was supposed to watch him, then she better be by his side all the time. In his eyes, they weren't close enough for him to share his plans with her. Even though the girl was furious, she tried to smile and keep the conversation going. She mentioned that she'd heard he had a little incident last night. Tayo didn't consider it an incident, just a minor misunderstanding, and he had no intention of talking about it, especially not with Eugene. Because of what had happened, she'd now have to stay by his side 24/7. That was Jin So-rang's order, and she was sure he wouldn't argue with that. Thanks to him, Eugene was staying overnight in a hotel room for the very first time. But Tayo wanted to remind her of something, whether she remembered what he told her last night. Tayo couldn't stand when anyone meddled in his business, and if she still wanted to be around him 24/7, she'd have to stay invisible. Tayo knew very well that Eugene desperately needed the money, so she'd better do her job without bothering anyone. Eugene tried to explain that if it weren't for the money, she wouldn't be here at all. But for her, it wasn't easy to live without causing trouble. That whole incident happened when she wasn't around. She didn't like it either, and he should keep that in mind. She couldn't imagine who in their right mind would willingly clean up someone else's mess. The CEO, Jin, kept saying it wasn't mandatory, but she knew very well that Eugene wouldn't refuse that kind of money. How could an ordinary office employee like her not obey an order from the company's CEO? She wasn't thrilled about the situation either, and Tayo needed to understand that. The man was surprised to hear she was getting paid for this. He hadn't expected his sister to go that far, spending so much out of her own pocket. Eugene couldn't understand why he thought she'd just follow him around for free without any reward. Her services were paid for, at least as long as she didn't mess up. But with his behavior, that could happen any minute, and then she'd be in big trouble. Despite everything, she was starting to think the amount the CEO offered her was way too small. It wouldn't hurt to ask for hazard pay on top of it. Tayo suddenly wanted Eugene to prove to him why he even needed her services, and why he couldn't do without her. She was genuinely stunned. Her demand was ridiculous, and she wasn't planning to prove anything. He wanted her to give him a reason why he should keep her around, waiting for her to prove her usefulness. Even though Eugene knew this was nonsense, she still had to agree. Tayo made it clear that he wasn't generous enough to keep useless people close to him. She had expected this, but still couldn't wrap her head around why her life had to be this hard and complicated. When she entered Tayo's room, she was shocked. It was huge and stunning. She couldn't help but ask how much
paid per night for such a luxurious room. He didn't understand why she cared. She'd never be able to afford a suite like his anyway. Eugene figured she might as well say something nice. Surprisingly, in black, he looked like a grim reaper. Tayo didn't get her compliment or why she made that comparison. Eugene hurried to explain that she hadn't meant anything bad. He suggested she just blame it on nerves and forget what she'd said. Then he tried to leave again, making her wonder where he was going. He said he wanted to visit one square shopping mall. After being away for so long, that's where he wanted to go first. Tayo and malls didn't really match, but since it was a work day, the parking lot was nearly empty. He didn't want to explain anything in detail, just said he needed to get to the 4th floor. But there were plenty of spots on the 2nd floor too. If he kept making things this complicated, life in Korea would be pretty hard for him. Tayo didn't like repeating himself. He added that it had to be Zone C and told her to confirm whether she understood or needed him to repeat it. Eugene did exactly as Tayo told her. At first, everything seemed fine. Not even a hint of him being annoyed, but he walked so fast that Eugene couldn't keep up. She kept calling out for him to wait. She apologized, but he was 188 centimeters and she was only 165 centimeters. With that kind of height difference, their walking speed was nowhere near the same. Since they'd be together everywhere, she asked him to at least slow down a little. Tayo didn't care whether she kept up or not. If she couldn't, that was her problem. All she had to do was push the button and quietly follow him. Was he a germaphobe or something? Afraid of catching something by touching buttons himself? Maybe this was part of his ridiculous usefulness test, making her silently press elevator buttons. She asked out of pure curiosity. After all, he could have pressed the button himself. It's not like he had broken fingers. His training at IDT was brutal, weeks without sleep, endless intense drills. Eugene noticed how suddenly serious his expression had become, unlike anything she'd seen before. Tayo told her how they trained in swamps and swam in seawater. They often didn't even get the chance to shower or wash their clothes. That was quite a long answer, but at least it confirmed he wasn't a germaphobe. She wanted him to wait because she didn't understand why he was testing her or trying to prove she was useless to him. He told her to prove why he needed her services. But honestly, she had no idea how to do that. Aside from driving or pressing elevator buttons, he couldn't imagine what else she could possibly do for him. She might think he was a jerk, but one day he'd regret it. The day she'd make him kneel. He sped up again, and Eugene struggled to keep up. It made her even angrier. As they walked down the hallway, Tayo noticed a security camera pointed straight at him. He even wondered where Eugene had gone so the camera would record them together. Tia walked fast and Yujin barely kept up, practically running through the crowd to avoid losing him. When she finally almost caught up, she tried to ask where he was going, but he didn't answer. She grew more and more irritated. Seriously, how hard was it to answer a simple question, or was he just ignoring her on purpose, testing her patience? She noticed he kept looking around, but she couldn't figure out what exactly he was searching for. Yujin had no choice but to follow him. Maybe things would become cleared a little later. When the man suddenly stopped and glanced around again, Yujin asked what he was looking for and offered to help him. He kept shifting his gaze, ceiling, walls, then ceiling again. What exactly was he trying to find? And could he at least tell her? Earlier, he said she could prove she was useful. Yujin felt confident she could help. After all, she once managed to find a lost cat. Tio finally turned to her, but the way he looked at her made her uncomfortable. He asked her to imagine being a 20-year-old girl. Yujin almost laughed. She actually was around that age. She turned 30 next year, but technically she was still in her 20s. Tio stayed silent for a couple of minutes, then stated firmly that Yujin had been at this mall on Saturday. She'd parked her car in the underground parking lot, 4th floor, Zone C. Then she got into the elevator and calmly went up to the 1st floor. As usual, she looked composed and focused on her own business. After that, she disappeared into thin air. Her car sat in the parking lot for almost a week. During that time, she never showed up on either the 1st or the 4th floor. Yujin asked what she'd been wearing that day when she first appeared at the mall. The girl understood there had never been anything between Tio and that girl, but she couldn't figure out what exactly he was trying to prove. He stood there silently, as if piecing together a logical chain of thoughts to lead him to the right conclusion. He needed to calm down and think. Most likely, the girl had planned to meet someone at the mall and was in a hurry. The meeting spot was probably the restaurant area on the 6th floor. It was always quieter there, perfect for private conversations. But why did she get off on the 1st floor instead of going up to the 6th? Did she change her mind? No, it was much simpler. She just arrived early. She probably wandered around the mall first, slowly making her way up the escalators to the 6th floor. For most girls, that was normal behavior. Surrounded by dozens of boutiques, they usually couldn't resist buying something. The reason Yujin asked about her outfit was simple. She believed that girl was meeting up with a man. Dinner and a movie, the classic date combo. And the mall even had a rooftop parking. If the guy was also driving and they left in his car, it made perfect sense why she never came back to the underground lot. Yujin wouldn't have done that. Parking there was way too expensive. Tio pointed out that if there had been something on the 1st floor she'd wanted to see, Yujin's guess might actually make sense. It annoyed him to see Yujin trailing after him like a clueless goldfish, doing whatever nonsense he demanded, though deep down he figured she might still be useful. Yujin didn't like being called a clueless goldfish. He didn't know who she really was, and that ticked her off. While talking to Tio, Yujin noticed other women glancing his way. Clearly, they found him handsome. She silently agreed he was attractive. But after spending just a little time with him, she realized his complicated personality made him nearly impossible to deal with. His difficult character and rude manners completely erased whatever charm his looks gave him. Appearances can be deceiving. Those strangers who admired his face had no clue about the jerk hiding beneath it. Lost in thought, Yujin didn't even notice when Tio suddenly walked off again. Without saying a word, she had to run to catch up. There were lots of blind spots in the surveillance system. That's why they couldn't get a perfect picture of what happened. Tio didn't expect to find many witnesses either. Payments were electronic now, and weekends were crowded. People rarely remember details. While they were standing in the parking lot thinking through the girl's actions, they didn't even notice a car speeding toward them. Yujin panicked. For some reason, she froze and couldn't move. The car whooshed past at high speed, the wind forcefully pushing her to the side. The driver raced out of the parking lot without even slowing down at the turns. Yujin was furious. She couldn't believe idiots like that were allowed to drive cars. But then she looked at Tio and was stunned. Someone almost died right next to him, and he didn't even flinch. Tio ignored her again, still thinking about the situation with that girl. He decided to check the exit while Yujin was supposed to head to the car. They'd meet at the main gate. She was pissed. She wasn't her servant, and she didn't have to follow his every order, she grumbled to herself. 8,000 for 40 minutes. That wasn't parking. That was daylight robbery. Could she at least expense it? As she drove out of the parking lot, Eugen spotted the car that had sped past her earlier. Could it really be the same jerk from the rooftop? She hated people like him. He didn't care about anyone else or what people thought of him. Oddly enough, the man was calm and collected, even though just a few minutes ago he'd almost hit someone. Then she noticed Tio waiting for her near the parking gate, standing not far from that jerk. The man, without even looking around, flicked his cigarette butt and missed his target. Eugen froze. She knew exactly what kind of temper Tio had, and he definitely wouldn't like this. The cigarette butt floated towards him slowly, and Eugen prayed it didn't actually hit Tio. It nearly did. If it had, things could have ended very badly. She tried to stop it with the sheer power of her thoughts, fully aware of how ugly this could get for that jerk. Tio stopped. At first, he looked completely calm, but in his eyes, a plan was already forming, a plan to punish this jerk. There was no way he could just walk away. With a temper like his, he simply couldn't let it slide. Eugen was surprised when Tio bent down, trying to pick up the cigarette butt from the ground. She couldn't even imagine why he was doing that. Tio picked it up, and by then he already knew exactly what he was going to do with it to teach that jerk a lesson. Eugen didn't understand why, out of the entire planet, that cigarette butt had to land right on Tio at the worst possible time. One look at his face told her trouble was coming. She instantly decided she needed to stop him. The stranger noticed Tio pick up the cigarette butt. Crossing his arms, he asked sarcastically what Tio planned to do with it. The man didn't say a single word. Without even looking at the jerk, he just tossed the butt straight into the jerk's car. The jerk went ballistic, yelling at him, asking if he had any idea how much that car cost. Tio kept his cool and calmly replied, asking if the guy even knew what a trash can was, and that cigarette butts belonged there, not on the street. The jerk shouted even louder, calling Tio a crazy freak. Watching from a distance, Eugen thought that this jerk had no idea who he was dealing with. With insults still flying out of his mouth, the man lunged at Tio with his fists. Not realizing what kind of trouble he'd just gotten himself into, Eugen already had a pretty good idea how this would end. And honestly, she was more worried for the jerk, because with his arrogance, he might really get hurt. Tio had served in the military for a long time. His reflexes were flawless, and dodging a sloppy punch like that was no problem. He grabbed the guy's arm in an instant and twisted it behind him, making the jerk cry out from the pain. Struggling to break free, holding him firmly, he used his other hand to grab his head and slammed it down onto the hood of the car. The jerk screamed at Tio to let him go while he was still being nice. But Tio ignored him, replying only that he'd better never piss him off again. The pain was so intense that he thought his arm was about to snap.